Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. We're going to do a little follow-up with color schemes and how to choose them. On this stamp sketch, we're featuring the country chapel and a moon up top here. This is the cloud with moon. Some filler images around with the tree cluster and foreground with the reeds. Okay? But the main point of this video is color schemes and how to choose them and how to work with them and apply them and in what order, okay? Now I'm doing this on all of my scenes, but I'm just kind of breaking it down into kind of the color, it's not so much color theory, but just the color application process, okay? All right, so to color something like this, we're going to utilize the inks for their for the properties that they're kind of best at, okay? So in terms of glossy cardstock, we're talking liquid inks, okay? And what I have here are dye-based inks, okay? And we're going to be utilizing them in a value range, going from light, medium, dark, and this is black right here, not a color, but we're going to be using this type of convention here with all of the media that we'll apply. We're going to have some fun with some large 3mm paint pens as well, okay? So this is dye-based inks, okay? We have paint pens here in both the extra fine and fine tip. I don't know if these are fine tip. They're really bold to me. They're 3mm. Often they're times they're referred to as fine. I don't know why. Like a Sharpie pen or something like that. White and blue. White and blue on this one. I'm not going to go into the dark tones on the paint pens. The paint pens are more as kind of embellishments to the foundation colors that we're going to be doing. And for kind of detailed coloring, we do have a kind of a light, two light blues right here. They're a little bit of a different hue, and a medium blue, okay? And integral, but not kind of part of the color scheme. It's more of a base coat will be some of the antique linen, and I've been doing that lately, and I don't know. I do that in a lot of my scenes, but I haven't really made a point of it so much in the past, but this antique linen here will just give this otherwise an all cool color blue scheme, kind of a foundation warmth, but we're not going to utilize that in the form of like a a beige pen within the color scheme. I don't think we're going to need that, okay? All right, so that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with our dye-based inks, okay? These paint pens like this and the alcohol pens, I guess in a way you can use them first, but the paint pens, they take a little bit longer to dry. They don't take super long time to dry, but they're raised, okay? So you'd really want to use kind of, this thin to thick type of application of media, okay? So the thinnest inks are the dyes and the alcohol inks, okay? But alcohol inks can apply on the top of dye-based inks easily, but sometimes the alcohol inks, they form on the surface and dry, so sometimes, applying water-based inks over alcohol is a little bit harder. They do apply, because, these do soak in and you still get some of the porous aspect of the, the surface of the paper, but it's just better to go water than alcohol than water, okay? You just get more penetration and application that way. Okay, so antique linen. This is a super pale distress ink, okay? It's very light in value as well. Some of the distress inks are darker in value. This one's very, very pale. A lot of people, if they're doing this on a scene, they're going to think that nothing's being applied. They're going to think their pad is dry. And as a matter of fact, they might buy a new one and think, oh my God, I bought a dry pad. That's not going to be the case, you know. Usually the pads, no matter how long they've been sitting on the store shelf, I'm not talking something that's been sitting on the store shelf for, 10 years or something like that. That might be dry, but that's as dark as that gets. It's barely darker than white, okay? There's a warmth to it. Hopefully you can see the difference between this and this, okay? Hopefully it's being picked up on the camera, but that's, that's the extent of that tone, okay? All right, so that's our first color. Easy enough, right? Now what I did was I left a little bit of the white of the moon, and I left some areas a little bit white, okay? But for the most part, I give it, I gave it a pretty good coverage, all right? If you don't retain any of the white, with the antique linen, it's okay. I prefer that you leave a little bit of white here and there, though. Just not a big area, although you could, we don't have to use this at all, but it gives the scenes a little bit more of a full look by having that range of temperatures in there, from very light to, very cool to a slight tinge of warmth. Okay, so we're extending the temperature range. Okay, Summer Sky is a Memento ink, and it's very, very light again. I don't know if I'll even be able to see. Yeah, I can see it a little bit. It's barely visible, though, okay? And it's barely visible, too, because I'm applying this wet ink on top of a pretty wet surface with the antique linen previously applied in, a fairly generous amount, okay? All right, now, where do you apply this? Okay, so I see this moon right here, and just in some areas of the surface right here, it's a good idea to leave some of these areas a little bit light, okay? Where you leave it light, it matters to a degree, but not as much as you might think. The big point is that you just retain some areas of light. So we have this oscillation of light and dark within here. So here's what I see in here. Here's some trees. It stands to reason that there would be some shadows being cast by these trees, by the chapel. So I'm going to darken. Now, if you can see on the chapel, there's areas of darkness that are already, I shade my designs, okay? There's this lighter area right here, but then this wall here is darker. And this side right here is darker. Okay, so those are the areas, and I put shadows underneath my trees too. So those are the areas that I just kind of follow suit, okay? I'm just reiterating what's already on the design, okay? All right, now I like to kind of bring a lot of attention to things like light sources, so I'm toning around my moon, okay? Now, like I said, this is a very light shade of, or value of blue. So it's not a big commitment to blue, okay? It's not a big commitment to your shadows. We're developing our color, our lighting scheme and color scheme, very incrementally. But do you see that kind of, initial kind of shading type of shading, and thus lighting structuring? We have this little path of light kind of coming down this way. And it's a path of light because we've made the area around this area darker, okay? See this right here? So this makes it super user-friendly too. Watch this ink, okay? You can do, the most horrific type of application of ink that you can possibly do. And it's not any big deal because you're working so light, okay? People are, and again, people are going to think their pads are dry, when you're working this light and value to start off your scenes. But it provides a really good base coat, and there's, there's literally, I don't know about literally, but it is very hard to do, to get any kind of unintentional, undesirable mark when working that light. Okay, but that is a nice foundation. So we're not only coloring, though. I'm kind of saturating the card at this point in time. It's really good with this layered dye-based ink type of application, because now I'm on, a darker tone here, okay? See that? You can really tell the difference, but these darker tones really smoothly apply, okay? And why is that? Well, it's because there's a foundation layer of that coloring in here, okay? So see how easy this is to apply in a very smooth, blended application. It's very, very easy to blend. So see, I could blend on a completely dry piece of paper like this too, but I can feel it here. It's just when I apply this down, because the page is fairly saturated with ink, okay, and moisture. Not super saturated, but it's wet, okay. This just blends, and it's almost like an airbrush, type of application. It's so smooth and blended, okay. I'm not fighting it. Now, the more dry and arid it is, like if I'm doing this during summertime on a very dry type of, relative humidity day, then this is going to be drying faster. So what you might do is you might use more of these lighter inks as a base, so you get more of that moisture in the pulp of the paper. Okay, but can you see that lighting scheme really starting to come about because we're shading in those areas, okay? And see, I've kind of just shaded in the same area. Look at that light on the chapel now, okay? It's because I've shaded this side of it, all right? Now I can get into some detailed shading, but that's not what this is for. That's what the, the alcohol pens are really great for, getting into really specific areas. Okay, now, when do you know to move on to your next tone? Well, what I do is, when I'm applying whatever color or value of a certain hue I'm applying, just is not going to get any darker in the darkest of areas in which I'm applying it, that's when I will move on to my next color. If you can get darker using your existing ink that you happen to be applying, if you can get darker doing that, then do that, okay? But when it is just not getting any darker, then there's no use applying. I could apply 1,000 more coats of Bahama Blue, and it's only going to get as dark as that ink is in its full saturation, okay? All right, now I don't have too much darker of a blue. I have a Danube Blue Mento, but this is the Marvy Prussian Blue. It's just so much darker, okay? Now when you get into, your really dark tones, okay, what you do is you apply it in a smaller area, and then I can just wipe it right on like that. If you're working with a matte cardstock, what you have to do is you have to apply more ink, because it's going to be a lot more absorbent, okay? But you can build up a good saturated layer in which the darker tones apply very easily, okay, and smoothly. It's easier on glossy in this case, but what you do is you just make your adjustments. Maybe you use more of the alcohol inks or something like that we'll be using, or something like that, but you can get a good base coat with your dye-based inks, okay? I like matte papers to do something like this as a base layer with dye-based inks, or I like just going in with straight colored pencils and doing that. So instead of, your dye-based inks, or being more heavily featuring the dye-based inks, maybe we would feature more like colored pencil or something like that within our color schemes, okay? All right. So this right here, it's really strengthening that lighting there by making my area on the perimeter and in the shadows darker, okay? Prussian Blue is pretty dark too. It doesn't get as dark as it potentially can be sometimes because there's a lot of inks on the page, so we're starting to achieve kind of a super saturated surface on here, so sometimes it doesn't apply as easily because we're going wet into wet, and you kind of tap down and you come back up and not as much is being transferred on the paper, okay? But it's transferring now. That's why I do some tapping like this, because sometimes if I wipe in these more saturated conditions, it doesn't apply. It's like I'm wiping off ink sometimes. So you have to kind of do it like this sometimes to build up ink. So sometimes in the darker tones, tap. And then it starts to set up a little bit and dry, then you can kind of wipe on like that if you want. Okay, so that is that. Let's go all the way to black, too. All right, so the black, again, it's a darker tone. It's a darker value, okay? So we stay on the edge a lot longer, okay? And then you just kind of blend it in like that. Don't kind of be in a hurry to get all four corners like I'm going to be doing in here. Don't go like this and this and this, okay? Because then you end up getting like a real harsh kind of look like that. So stay on one edge and develop it. See, I'm kind of going back and forth a little bit like that, but I'm kind of featuring it more in the corner. Then as it gets drier, I'm kind of going in there like that. And that way I get this nice transition, okay? Corner. Now this one's closer to the moon. This area right here is not as dark as this side, okay? So I'm staying in the corner a little bit longer, and then you can kind of blend it in like this, okay? If didn't apply as much of those lighter tones, it might be kind of a harsher kind of application of it. If so, then just go back in with your lighter tones, okay? And apply more of that, and then go back to the black, okay? So don't forget about that. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I'm adding in, by the time I get to black, dye-based inks dry pretty quickly, and I feel like the application isn't applying as smoothly anymore. So I just go back in with my lightest tones again and just kind of re-moisten the whole thing right on top, and then you can go back in and have an easier time with your darker inks. I mean, I don't really need to do that too much. Sometimes, especially with like a half-page scene or a full-page scene where, it's taken a while to get through, I don't know, a range of 4 to 5 different values over a larger surface. Summertime or something like that, it's a little bit more arid, okay? So inks are drying faster in those conditions, okay? One of the things I didn't do was I didn't use a re-inker for my first ink. And that's one of the things that really assures that you get a pretty, moist surface to work on for the almost, the entire duration of your toning, inking, lighting, shading process, okay? All right, so I'm applying some, see this grayscale? I mean, it's really, really light. Look at this. That's a lot of taps right there, and that's like I don't know, 10% gray. And that's when I'm applying it on some of my chapel right here, okay? All right, so that's all we need to do with that, all right? So, what? Quarter piece of paper towel that did the job there. Okay, now, using this wide applicator like this is not conducive for getting into detailed areas, okay? So let's see this chapel right here, okay? Let's go in with our alcohol inks now, okay? Just standard alcohol markers right here. I'm going to start applying some of this from light, okay? And then slightly darker, and this is like, I don't know, medium tone, right? I don't know how much of the medium tone I'll be using. I use mostly my lighter values in here, but see where this chapel is darker inherently, okay? I'm just reiterating that. See, like this under the eave, now I can get a little detailed area like this. It's barely visible again. This is very light blue here, okay? But I can get, the side of the chapel that's a little bit darker. I can get the shadow here. I can get some in here. I'm lifting some of the ink you know, this dye-based ink isn't all dry on here, okay? So I can feel it lifting. I can see it lifting some of that, but don't worry about that. Okay, some of these little steps right here. I can get some of these areas in my meadow here. Oh, and here's some trees on my meadow. See, I can get these areas. I can have some shadows being cast by these trees. See, like this little area right here at the base of these trees? I mean, that would be hard to get to with this. Okay, so see, right here, it's easy to get that. So I can get this without darkening up this column because this is just a perfect little instrument for that. So I can go dark right here without getting in my chapel, too. All right, so that is that. We're not talking huge changes here or anything like that. It's just kind of incremental little changes happening. Let's see, doing little things like this, it just makes things a little bit richer from a shading aspect. I guess we are layering in another layer of blue on top of other layers of blue, so it's a richer tonal palette. Okay, see this tree right here? I can shade that and create little shadows. When you add these shadows at the base of objects, you give them kind of presence too. They're sitting in that area. You're saying that they're not transparent, okay? So they do cast shadows, like my hand here on this paper is casting a shadow, right? There's white, that. Okay, so you give it presence. All right, this is a darker blue. See this little bit of darker blue? I kind of create kind of transitioning shadows. It's a little bit darker in one area, and then what I do is I go back and I blend this in right here. Sometimes it's a little bit too dark, okay? So I go like this. It's a really rich blue here. Now this is glossy cardstock, so this allows me to blend it in, okay? Let's go back to lighter blue, and we just kind of blend that in a little bit. It's kind of lifting some of that ink too, so it does remove some of it, when you go back in with a lighter tone. Or you can use your blender pen, I just use color for my blending most of the time. Sometimes I do want to go with a blender, blender alcohol pen marker, but most of the times I like to use color out of my color scheme. See, I put this blue underneath that. That makes that, I forgot this part of the, is it pediment or something like that, of the chapel, kind of stand out by contrast. See, this make this little area a little bit darker underneath. It's not dark, it's not going with black. But see how much more that stands out, kind of three-dimensionally like that. And see, you might have noticed I'm always kind of doing this side of the, whatever steepled structure. Okay, like that. All right, so anyways, I just tend to think that's looking a little bit more, or I don't know, quite a bit more three-dimensional in some cases, okay? All right, so that is that with pens. So we're just working our way through media. It hasn't taken too long. I'm blabbing away too, so that's taken a while. Okay, now let's have some fun. This is just going kind of extreme with some of these pens. This is the 3mm paint pen. You can do this like pointillism type of effect. You don't have to use it. You can omit any of these steps, colors right here. Now, I mean, I don't know if you omit the dye-based ink. That's kind of the foundation one for this type of look, but this can give our piece a little bit of a kind of a, oh, I don't know. It's like a impressionist type of look. This is paint right here, so it's like adding little spots of paint, or lighting, you might say, because that's what this kind of represents. It's blue. I'm kind of adding it in where there is that same hue. Okay, so I'm adding, see, you can barely see it right in there because it's the same value as this blue right in here, okay? But that's where you start it, and then you kind of creep it out into the darker areas where it stands out like that, okay? I have it right here where it's a little bit darker than the antique linen right in here, okay? So it's pretty subtle, but it's kind of part of that area. What this is doing is it's giving it a little bit more of a textural type of twist, okay? So I'm adding it again where it's basically the same value, and then I'm moving it into this area that's darker, so this stands out, okay? And we'll blend this in too in the end as well, so we're going for a little bit of texture, and then we mellow out that texture and blend in the texture a little bit more, okay? You know, because these big dots are, you know, pretty extreme. It does give it a really nice kind of feel too, you know. We're talking about kind of a kinesthetic visual language here when I say it's giving it a good, nice feel, you know. It's kinesthetic, it's touch, you know. So when you're working with visuals like that, you know, we can also think of texturing and, you know, we're dipping into basically another sense, okay? You know, everything that we do, we're doing things kind of visually, but when we go in and we add in these textural touches, we're giving the pieces more of a kinesthetic feel. Okay, I use some yellow. Oops, now I just polluted my tip here with blue, but you just wipe this off right here. I'm sure I used this in like an autumn scene last time, so I have a little bit of a yellow on this. So just kind of clean off your tip like that. I just smeared it with blue. Okay, that's white again. These pens are very forgiving. Okay, so here's white, okay? And adding it right in the white, okay? So see that? Whenever you use whatever color you're doing, you kind of add it in that area in which it already exists, and then you creep it into the surrounding areas, okay? So on here, I've left my little cloud lining white. Well, it's more of the antique linen, but it's close enough, okay? It's like in that same value. That's why this is good to retain some light areas, okay? All right, so this little white here. It's kind of reiterating the path of light that's in this piece. I never would have done this before because like these dots really stand out, but I don't know, they're really fun to use, and it gives the pieces kind of a. I mean, this is acrylic paint, so it kind of is painting, but it just gives the pieces a different look and feel. Again, going back to that textural kind of aspect of it. Okay, so that is that. Again, these tips are pretty thick. Okay, so let's go in with these ones right here. Again, it isn't completely necessary. Okay, or it isn't necessarily at all, but, just to reiterate this is a finer touch, so I can kind of develop my illuminated areas in a much finer type of touch with a finer tip. All right, after all, this one's a lot thinner, finer tip at 0.7 millimeter than 3 millimeter. I haven't invested in it yet, but I have it in my my list. I think there's a 5 millimeter paint pen. I thought, dare I go that, thick for something like scenes, People use these, those really thick pens, like the 3 millimeters, the 5 millimeters for like rock painting. You take a rock and you do a little artwork on it. But for scenes like this, that where I'm usually focusing on much more of the details. You know, they're really bold, but that boldness is often quite fun, I'm finding. So, okay, so that is that. That's light blue. Let's go to the white right here. Okay, I've shook these up previously, you know, before I started this video. A lot of times I don't do any prep work in starting these videos, but I should sometime. You know, shaking up a pen isn't compelling video watching. Not that any of my videos are compelling watching, but, you know, some parts of it even less so. Okay, now if I got ink, you know, on like columns like this or something, you know, you can kind of go back in, or like on the steeple right here, maybe we can get that to stand out a little bit more white. There is the antique linen warm tone on there, you know, so we can create a little bit of contrast between white and that antique linen. It's really minimal because antique linen is very light. Okay, it's not a dark tone at all. But there is your texture, okay? I try to create as much texture in my designs as possible, but then what we do is we just go into it and reiterate or kind of come up with more texture. And that's where, when people look at a finished piece or just the designs themselves stamped out, it has a certain look, but it also has a certain feel. You know, some designs are kind of absent of all textures, okay, out there. And that's fine, but it just makes it one sense that you're utilizing. When you do things like this with texture, there's a certain feel to it, so you can dip into that part of your being, okay, by addressing textures like that, okay? You know, this is just a flat surface, and there's not a lot of texture to it. I guess we are in a very, I don't know, not quite microscopic way, but it's just a very minimal kind of raised, I don't know, whatever aspect to the scenes, you know, when we're using media like this. But it can look very textural, okay? So we're talking about visual texture. And, you know, we might as well dip into the senses, okay? You know, we have, you know, more than one sense that we can kind of dip into when we're talking about two-dimensional artwork, okay? Okay, so this is my Brilliance White Ink, okay? Go ahead and use your whatever white ink you're using, okay? This is going to dip into texture even more, okay? This is white, and it's part of the, you know, we had the white of the card that we're utilizing, okay? And we use this white media. So here's another white media right here, okay? And I don't need to go into like a light blue brilliance. I guess you could. I don't have that, or any, you know, too many colors of brilliance inks. I have like the metallics and black. But yeah, you know, so that being said, you can, you know, maybe try out, you know, if you have some light blue pigment ink, go ahead and give it a try. And see, I'm applying it very thinly like this, so it'll dry on this type of cardstock. But see this right here, this really diffused texture right here. It's a very soft one, but it's also reiterating lighting, okay? And we'll follow this down right here in the corridor of light. Okay, and put some of this on these trees right next to it, like that. We can come in here and bring in a little bit of fog at the base of these trees like that. Okay, but can you see what's happening from a textural standpoint by adding this in like that? It's soft, right? So now, if you're someone that likes touch, and I think a lot of you do, because a lot of us like papers. Crafters love papers, okay? So, it's like handmade papers too, especially. It's, you know, we're not going around like with copy paper and saying, oh my gosh, I love that copy paper. No, it's like those textural ones that we tend to like, you know, linens and like watercolor paper, handmade papers, those are the types of papers that we tend to, kind of make notice. I don't know, we notice them a lot more, from a textual standpoint, and we can't help but touch them, right? That's why it's really hard to walk out of a place that has all these different papers and patterns and things like that for paper crafters. Okay, so anyways, that is the soft aspect of it. So we've really expanded on the range of texture in here, but again, using a color out of our color scheme, okay? Sharp highlights, soft highlights, okay? But again, just kind of working through these ranges of different values, but utilizing them for their different properties, okay? Okay, so let's talk about that. What was used for what, okay? So, dye-based inks, okay, they're good for general areas of application. They're not good for, like, coloring in, like, one little tiny area of the chapel, but, for this area out here, it works perfectly for that. You get a lot of coverage depending on what type of applicator you're using. I guess if we had some kind of real thin, kind of tiny little applicator, we can utilize dye-based inks. But I'm using it with, a large applicator like something like this, or you can use like a sponge, okay, or any kind of sponge, implement, okay? So coverage and detailed applications of tone, shadow areas underneath trees, areas within structures, areas within, I don't know, like cloud structuring up here. You can get in, certain little areas in there if you want to deepen the shadow and three-dimensional aspect of it, okay? Using mostly the lighter tones and moving into, the medium tone, but then the medium tone's kind of dark, so you go back in and blend it out with your lighter tones again. Okay? So detailed areas. Vast areas, detailed areas, okay? Okay, and then when you start moving into like specific little areas or kind of something to kind of describe texture and pointillism type of lighting in here, okay? Pens like these, okay? Now, a lot of times, for years, I wasn't using. I just started using these like this year. Okay, but it has a cool kind of look to it, like that. There's a hand-done made something. One of the most important aspects to things like painters and painting is the presence and kind of conscious awareness of the brush stroke. You can see brush strokes. There brings a lot of gesture into it. Things like this can apply a lot of gesture into it. It's something that's been done by the hand, by the creator, by the person that has applied these types of things. The idea of something like this isn't to try to achieve something that a camera can do much more efficiently, in a 30th of a second or something like that. So I'm not trying to make a photographic, look of scene, inherently. We're just, we're working with dye-based inks and stuff like that, and pens and things like that, So the presence of textures and detailed textures and whatnot are really fun to do, and it has a really great look to it, I think. Okay, so, talking about that aspect of rewarding the viewer for closer inspection, that's what you're really doing with kind of detailed marks like this. Or, on something like this, you can apply things like glitter, clear glitters, what is sparkles? I forgot the name of that glitter. You can apply little sparkles in here, too. Have rhinestones and things like that. You can do little touches like that. And it kind of becomes a little bit more interactive when you give this to someone. If they can see little detailed areas in there that you've applied, it kind of makes it extra special. You can do a little, I can do kind of splatter painting over this where there's like some snowfall, okay? And when people kind of receive your pieces, they really appreciate the little kind of details you put into it. and how you did it. And it becomes a lot more interactive of a piece. If you can give something to someone and they say, oh my gosh, that's really nice. But if you can get them to go, oh wait, look at that, what is that? Or, let's put some snowfall in here, okay? If you can get them to kind of look and inspect your piece a little bit closer, it's that extra few seconds that makes it, really kind of nice for you as, us as the creators of the pieces, if someone kind of, takes a look and, really appreciates it like that. I'll do this little Charlie Brown type of little thing to these snowfall like this. I'll trail some of these off, like this. I don't always do this. I rarely do this, but since I have that larger little dot like that, sometimes this makes it a little bit more kind of whimsical. No, it doesn't look like that out in nature, but it kind of looks like, like a Charlie Brown Christmas. I don't know if they have those little areas trailing off like that, but it seems like it. Okay, so you have these little things like this going on. See that? Those little things. But then when you look at it at arm's distance, it's not, quite so apparent, but then you reward the recipient of your card for further inspection, that they can see those little things. And like I said, you can put little clear rhinestones or something like that where they're kind of extra shimmery, or put a little shimmer down there. Okay, so anyways, hope that comes in handy for you in terms of a color family, kind of running through each of your different mediums that you're applying into a piece, but you're utilizing them for their strengths. And, kind of lending itself to kind of a greater whole, what is it, a greater whole than what is that saying? But it's greater than the sum of its parts or whatnot. But it all leads to visual harmony, when you're utilizing those same types of hues and values throughout your different media being applied. Okay, so anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or whatnot, leave a comment below. Okay, thanks again.